for Efficiency Manitoba. I'm an energy efficiency specialist. And today I am going to be talking about briefly Efficiency Manitoba's mandate. And I was asked to speak to what we're calling the natural gas challenge. This essentially is what would be required to decarbonize our homes and buildings in Manitoba. So to reduce and eventually eliminate fossil fuel use. So we're doing a little exercise on what that would look like and how that's achievable. And then a little bit about some of the programs that we have and some of the highlights, some of the ones I want to highlight for today. And energy efficiency in action essentially it's not a case, it's an actual example of a building that has drastically improved its energy efficiency. And so that's what we're going to go through today. So Efficiency Manitoba's mandate is to reduce electric consumption in Manitoba by 1.5% annually and natural gas consumption by 0.75% annually of what would have happened in the absence of our energy efficiency programs. So that is our mandate. Now, we don't have a mandate for electrification or GHG reductions, but as a result of our programs, reducing electric consumption and also more significantly natural gas consumption, we are achieving GHG reductions every year that we operate. And you can see those are piling up over the years and certainly are significant. So now to the project where I was asked to go through was the natural gas challenges, or as I'm calling it, not as flashy a name, but meeting peak electricity demand in winter. Now, the reason I say that is because our natural gas consumption in Manitoba is primarily for water heating, but also space heating, more importantly. And even as it is right now, our peak energy usage in Manitoba happens in the months of December to February on typically the coldest days of the year. And that peak, you can see throughout the day, energy usage adjusts, and it's particularly high in the morning when everybody wakes up, turns on their coffee maker, all the lights, and turns up the thermostat. And then it dips down a bit throughout the day as people hopefully turn off their lights when they leave home and maybe turn down the thermostat. And then it peaks back up when everybody returns back home. And turns up, turns on the lights, starts cooking, and businesses are also still operating at that time around. So you see those double peaks that we have. Of 3 of the last 4 record peaks I believe we had were at 5 p.m. and 1 was at 7 a.m. So those are the points that we need to keep mindful of, because if you're going to reduce or eliminate natural gas usage, which is for heating, those peaks are going to be that much higher. And we're going to need to make up for that energy with other forms of energy or electricity. Now, we're not summer constrained, as you can see here. I looked at some publicly available data, and you can see that our summer usage is actually more than 2 megawatts less than it is in the winter. So we don't particularly need as much energy, obviously, in the summer, and so that's not the bigger issue. It's that on-peak winter capacity, primarily for space heating, that we need to make up. So, just to give an idea of if Manitoba were to fully decarbonize in this front, we're looking at natural gas loads being equivalent to about all of our current electric capacity. So there's been reports out there that said that we need to double our electrical capacity in Manitoba. Now, if you were to, well, it's actually not really feasible through just hydroelectric generation, because hydrological analysis in Manitoba says that the max potential we have in Manitoba is 4 to 5 megawatts. So we certainly couldn't just do it with hydroelectricity. And if you did that, it wasn't just the cost of the generating stations that would go up, it would actually be the cost of the transmission and distribution and customer owned infrastructure that has to be done as well. So we have a variety of options that I'd like to highlight. So one of them is, obviously, as we talked about, is more electric generation. And as I said, if you just simply try to meet that natural gas load with more electric generation, then you're going to have significant distribution upgrades and transformers, and even customers themselves are going to have to upgrade their electrical panels and all sorts of things like that. Now, the other option being is customer-sited energy resources, otherwise known as distributed energy resources. These are typically wind, solar, and energy storage. Now, another option is to shift that electric peak usage. As I indicated back here, you see if we could shift these peak usages at the morning and evening, if you could shift them off to later times, then that would reduce the amount of capacity gains that we would need. And then the last option I want to talk about is reducing energy consumption in general, and this is what Efficiency Manitoba does. Now, what option would we need to do? Well, all of these. We would need to do all of these, and it's just a variety of the energy mix that we're going to need to achieve to do this. So here's an example of what some cost of new generation is, and this is based on the International Energy Agency and their projections on the cost of new generation coming online in 2025. And so you can see that the more economical forms are, wind and solar. Keep in mind that because those are intermittent technologies, you would actually have to add energy storage on top of that. And we need systems that can achieve that peak winter savings, as I said, right? So then you got hydroelectricity, and then obviously there's natural gas combined cycle, but that kind of defeats the purpose here. If we're trying to work towards a road to decarbonization, then adding a natural gas load isn't gonna help that. Now, one that's not on here is actually energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is the least expensive form of new energy. So essentially, it's kind of that concept of a dollar saved, a dollar earned. So if we can reduce our electric usage on that peak, then that's electricity that could be used elsewhere. And the one thing about energy efficiency is that none of these other forms of new energy generation are going to reduce customers' bills. If you're adding new forms of energy generation onto our grid, then that new generation is certainly going to be more costly than that legacy systems that were built 100 years ago or 40 years ago, and that have been either paid off or mostly paid off at this point. And energy efficiency is actually the only form of energy that's going to improve the comfort of a home or building that in which you do it. So just keep that in mind as well. And it also reduces the need for distribution upgrades and transmission upgrades as well. So I want to highlight a couple of ways that Efficiency Manitoba can help us achieve this transition. If we're going to do the most cost-effective means first and first tackle that, then how can we do this? Well, looking at the economics of energy efficiency, you can see here that the payback is quite beneficial. And this is just based on current energy rates in Manitoba. So anything I'm talking about is the Manitoba context. Let's keep that in mind. So you can see here that, home insulation and air tightness and lighting, these are the most cost-effective means of reducing a residential customer's bills. Now, these payback calculations, these simple payback calculations, are based on incremental costs. So I'm not talking about ripping off the siding of a perfectly good building that's 5 years old and upgrading that insulation. It's the point of time when a customer is deciding to upgrade something in their facility, the windows, doors, insulation, or and they decide to go with an more energy efficient option. It's the incremental cost. And we have incentives that reduce that incremental cost. And that's how you're achieving these phenomenal paybacks in these residential and here the commercial programs. And again, you can see here the building envelope is the most cost-effective means as well on the commercial side of things. So I'll get into a couple programs, and I know I'm going to go a little bit quickly on some of these things. Some of these measures could certainly have an hour on each topic, so by all means, you'll have time for questions at the end. But here's one of the ones that certainly has phenomenal paybacks and will give us on-peak energy savings in the winter is lighting, because lighting is going to be operating during those peaks. And so here we can see that in an actual project example here, we had a customer that eliminated their metal halide fixtures and replaced them with LED fixtures. And they actually achieved a payback of 3.3 years. And the benefits of LEDs, being longer product life and less maintenance and so many more options and flexibility of lighting. With previous forms of lighting, it was you got the color temperature that you got. Whereas LED lightings, you can go from warm light to blue light. I've even seen those lights that you can do little party lights, and they can actually alter and change the light. So there's so much more flexibility in those, and great energy savings. One of the forms of energy reduction that we really need to talk about, and if we're going to make significant inroads in reducing our heating loads and reducing that winter peak usage, it's the building envelope. And here you can see in this example on the right, which I've crossed out, is you can see thermal bridging here, where the traditional way of insulating buildings was putting insulation in between the studs. So here you can see in this house that there is thermal bridging through the stud, and it's actually warming up the exterior of the house. Exactly, you see that those offsets where the studs are. Now, that's even more significant if you're looking at metal studs, that they transfer even more heat. So how can we improve on this? Well, what we know now is quite straightforward, is that you need to insulate from the exterior first. So we can see an example in a standard home, for instance, where you went by 2x6 construction and installed R20 bats. Your effective R value for that wall, because of the thermal bridging, would be R16. Whereas you can actually have a 2x4 construction and only install R12 bats, but then do 2 inches of rigid on the exterior, and you get a solid thermal break. And you're actually getting an effective R value of R20. So you're getting a 25% improvement at very minimal costs. And those savings last for a very extended period of time. Now, if you wanted to go even further, and we're getting into requirements for net zero, if that's the way the legislation is going, then we'll have to go into these double wall systems with Larson truss, so you have enough room for 4 inches of insulation on the exterior, a very solid break of insulation. And obviously, you're going to need high performance windows as well, and the like. Another thing I want to talk about is the involved in building envelope is air tightness. It's really the unsung hero, and it doesn't get enough credit because you don't see a whole lot of it. But you can see in this image on the top here, I actually passed by this building anyways, and you see this picture here where the air leakage is just impressive in a bad way, where that can happen in all sorts of buildings. If you have a standard home that had 4.5 air changes an hour, and you reduce that, not just with a bit of work, reduce that to 3.5, which isn't even it wouldn't be hard to achieve. Then it's essentially the equivalent of upgrading your wall insulation from R12 to R18, or increasing your attic insulation from R20 to R60. And you can do these kind of things with, say, $1,000 or less of work on improving the air sealing around your windows and doors. So it's not insignificant, and the return is huge. Now, getting into the actual heating systems, first I would say the focus should be on reducing the need for the heating system. That should be your primary objective. But once you've upgraded reduced your internal heating loads, and then your building envelope, then we can look into ground source heat pumps. Now, the reason that ground source heat pumps are more efficient than other heating systems is because they're just moving heat versus creating it. So the ground in Manitoba is about 5 or 6 degrees. And so what a ground source heat pump does is, through a series of ground loop and compression and expansion cycles, you're amplifying that heat and bringing it into the building. And from there, you can achieve a 60% reduction in energy use, or turn 1 kilowatt hour of pumping capacity into 2.5 kilowatt hours of heat. And this will actually achieve on-peak winter savings. So then now we're reducing that peak load on our system so we can use that somewhere else, and we don't have to add new costly forms of generation. And Efficiency Manitoba actually already has commercial incentives available for ground source heat pumps. And in this year, we'll be rolling out incentives on the residential side as well, which I'm very excited about. But not all ground source heat pump installations are equivalent, and that goes the same for building envelope and air sealing and so forth. You have to take a concerted effort and make energy efficiency a focus of what you're trying to achieve. So as I said, first off, it'd be best to improve the building envelope first, because that reduces the amount of ground source heat pump heating capacity you need, which improves the cost effectiveness of the system. I need to design systems so that there's balanced heating loads as best as you can. If you're constantly pulling heat out of the ground and returning very little heat in, so you would return heat back in when the heat pump system basically operates in reverse in say the summer when you're adding cooling loads, and then you're pulling heat out of your building and putting it back into the ground. So that's when you'd reverse your system. If you don't have a balanced system, then you're over time going to reduce the efficiency of how that system operates. So the ways to avoid that is to having a good designer or engineer that has experience in designing these systems, and they can do that through obviously their experience, but also through loop design software that factors in the soil conditions and the configuration of your loop design. You need enough space to be able to install a loop. If you're just putting your drilling your holes in and installing a loop, and they're 2 feet apart, you're just stealing heat from each other, and the effectiveness of that system is not going to last the test of time. Another thing is the installer of the system should be an MGA certified installer, and that's a requirement for our Efficiency Manitoba incentive programs as well. Another form of more efficient heating, electric heating, is air source heat pumps. Now, again, not all air source heat pumps are created equally. There's a multitude of air source heat pumps that are made for significantly more mild climates. Now, what I'm talking about is what we call a cold climate air source heat pump. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a standard that defines cold climate air source heat pumps. But they're variable capacity heat pumps that have the ability to operate as low as -25. Now, when you're getting to that cold outdoor temperature, their efficiency certainly declines. They're certainly a lot more energy efficient in the shoulder seasons of spring and fall. But like, as I said, our winter peak happens on the typical coldest days of the year, or when you have several really cold days in a row. So these air source heat pumps will provide us more energy, but they won't necessarily provide us peak demand savings in the coldest days of the year. But they're certainly a lot better than your basic electric resistance heating system. And they can be used in situations where you just don't have the right soil conditions or space to install a proper ground source heat pump loop. And we'll actually have incentives coming to market for this in 2021. I just want to give you an example of the difference in home heating. And I use home heating just because looking at buildings, the heating, it's so incredibly different based on what the building is used for and what internal loads there are. So I'm referring to some home heating because it's a lot more standard average home. So here we can see that this is the cost of the various types of residential heating systems based on the energy efficiency of the various electric and gas heating systems. So you can see that the carbon tax is certainly, ground source is already on par in competitiveness with high efficiency natural gas, but you see that air source, the cold climate, and the one in the middle there, which is the non-cold climate system, their cost effectiveness is improving. And if we were to fast forward and basically lock these energy prices at what they are now and install a $170 a ton carbon tax, then you can see what's going to happen over time. Now, certainly over the next 20 years, there's going to be inflation, one would presume, in the cost of electricity. Now, in order for natural gas heating and just basic electric resistance heating to be on par on price, the cost of the carbon tax based on current energy rates would need to be about $280 a ton. So just something to keep in mind, keep that in perspective. Another thing I want to talk about is ventilation air heating. So you could basically any commercial building and homes also need ventilation air heating as well. You need to bring in fresh air. You can't just close a box around a building and not bring in fresh air. So that's obvious, right? So we need to bring in fresh air. And you could put a meter of insulation around a building and you won't eliminate your need for bringing in fresh air. And again, that peak cost of bringing in that fresh air occurs in the dead of winter. And ventilation air heating can account for 50% of a commercial building's energy bill. So I want to talk about how you can reduce that cost and how you can kind of future-proof your building. And that's by installing a more efficient HR. Well, first off, installing heat recovery ventilation, but installing a more efficient heat recovery ventilator is the key. So there's a couple types of heat recovery ventilators right now. There's the plate heat exchanger, which is kind of a fixed system where the cold air and the hot air pass beside each other, but there's no movement in the heat core, energy core. These systems are they're good, but they're not ideal for Manitoba. We have some pretty extreme temperatures here, and there's been research out there that indicates that kind of the depths of our cold. These plate heat exchangers will frost up about half the time in the dead of winter, which is when you presumably want them the most, and when they could actually achieve that capacity savings. So they have to spend some time in defrost mode to kind of unfreeze, whereas there's more efficient heat recovery ventilators that actually are able to achieve efficiencies up to 90%. There's actually two manufacturers in Manitoba that produce these more advanced heat recovery ventilators. They're certainly a more costly product, but they actually work in the depths of our winter and they don't freeze up. And the way they're able to achieve is that they actually have a set of louvers that where the cold air stream passes and the hot air stream passes, it switches about every minute. And it does this enough that they don't frost up and you're able to achieve significant energy savings. You can see this graph here. It is certainly huge energy savings. This is based on a 42 suite apartment building that we monitored. Oh, and I will say the way that some people deal with the frosting of these heat recovery ventilators is that they install a bit of preheat before the HRV. Now, I would argue if you have to install preheat before the HRV, then you haven't spent enough on your HRV and you need to get a better HRV so that it doesn't need to be in a preheating mode, because the bigger the temperature difference between the ingoing air and the outgoing air, the more you're able to extract heat off that. So the better performance you're going to get, as long as it doesn't freeze up, obviously. Now, I want to talk about energy efficiency in action. Now, this is, we have a great opportunity. There's a lot of buildings that were built out in Manitoba in the 70s and 90s, and they're coming time for renovation. And we need to seize this opportunity to improve the energy efficiency for many years to come, because these renovation choices we make when, say, somebody's recladding a building or changing the exterior of their building, it doesn't cost much more if you're making that change to add insulation, and that exterior can last for 40 years or more, all depending on what's chosen. So we don't want to lock ourselves into poor energy performance by not taking the opportunity to upgrade. And with the incentives that we have and the cost of insulation isn't that significant. So it's a great opportunity to do that. So one of the buildings I wanted to talk about is a perfect example. It's this a personal care home in Minnedosa. And so this is a care home that was built in 1973. It's heated with the most basic of electric kind of heat, baseboards. Its ventilation air was heated with natural gas. And they renovated this building in 2017. And they achieved a 50% reduction in energy use. And I believe there was a 50 kilowatt reduction in their demand, or kVA reduction in their winter peak demand in this project. Now, I imagine you're wondering what they possibly could have done to do this, and this is not what they did. This is not necessary. Energy efficiency doesn't need to look crazy. It can look basic as this. It's a very small difference. What they did was the improvements to the envelope, the ventilation, heat recovery, and lighting. So they did exterior spray foam insulation, then redid the cladding and exterior on top of that. They actually upgraded the insulation from the interior as well. They went from a basic windows to triple pane fiberglass windows with low E coatings. Oddly enough, they actually increased the windows. There wasn't these windows on this side and the two sides of the building. So they actually increased the amount of glazing, which typically windows aren't exactly a great form of insulation, like a wall full of insulation would be, but they achieved this energy savings while actually increasing the amount of windows. And they upgraded the doors, and they did air sealing upgrades. It was, in fact, they had done the renovation, closed up the building, they did their air sealing test, and they realized that it wasn't as good as they wanted, so they went back and did it. So I can't speak enough to that kind of doing the testing and doing the energy modeling to see what kind of ways you can achieve the energy savings. And the air sealing they did was the equivalent of closing a 2 square foot hole in the it's equivalent of closing a 2 square foot hole in the side of the building. Now, one of the big elements that I talked about earlier, and I can't stress enough, is that ventilation heating. They installed a high efficient heat recovery ventilator, or more so actually energy recovery ventilator. And they reduced half of the savings that they achieved was through this, because it's a 90% efficient system. And they also upgraded the lighting. They upgraded all the lighting in the common areas and in the suites as well. And they achieved all this half a reduction without actually making any significant changes to their heating system. So you could say that once they did this, they could even go further and upgrade to potentially, if they had the space and it was the right conditions, a ground source heat pump system, and then achieve even greater savings. But there was nothing crazy that they had to do besides, it's a deep retrofit, but they achieved some really deep savings in this. And so that's kind of what I'll impart you with, is that achieving this doesn't have to be outlandish, and it's achievable, and we already have the means to do it right now. We have a significant amount of commercial retrofit and new building offers, and our new building offers looks at energy modeling, and that's definitely a route to go when you're looking at new builds, or commercial and residential. And then one other thing I want to talk about is Efficiency Manitoba's innovation fund. So part of our new energy efficiency plan has set aside funds for our innovation strategy, where we have $700,000 annually to support pilot projects or applied research with the aim of reducing barriers to adoption of technologies in Manitoba. So there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of strategies, I suppose, that could be applied in Manitoba, but maybe there isn't enough research or work that's being done because we have a more extreme climate. We don't necessarily, we don't have the same volume, and people aren't trying to save all the problems that are happening in California or, Vermont, or places that have certainly more population than us. So this is a really great fund, and this will be coming out this year, where we'll be accepting applications for the innovation fund. And I'm very looking forward to that fund, and to seeing what kind of innovative things Manitobans want to apply research for. And by all means, we have all of information on our website, but you can contact us anyway and keep up to date with what we're working on here at Efficiency Manitoba. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I could see them piling up, but I wasn't able to read them, so.
That's great. Thank you so much, Éric. So just going through the chat, does anybody want to say their questions themselves, or would you like me, if you want to put your question yourself. If you just want to put a star in the chat, that would be delightful. And Eric, do you just want to stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody's beautiful
yeah.
faces? That's okay. All right, so, all right, it sounds like nobody wants to jump in, so I'll read this from the top. So looking at, are there construction cost increments analysis with these upgrades? That's coming to us from Gurmeet.
So you might need some clarification on the question, but I'm assuming this is referring to the simple payback, which was factoring in what the savings are based on Manitoba's energy rates versus the cost of doing the upgrade. Like, as I said, the most of the things we went through were incremental costs. So like I said, if it was installing insulation when you were going to be redoing the roof on a building, you know, and what's the cost of you're redoing the roofing on that building now, what's the cost of adding that insulation and the additional labor material cost minus the rebate that you can obtain from Efficiency Manitoba. That's how that incremental, that's how that payback calculation was reached. And I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure.
Gurmeet, did you have a follow-up question for that at all?
Nope. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Next, we have a question coming in from Mike. What would we do with the comparatively low emitting electricity we'd save? Would it be sold to jurisdictions with dirtier grids like Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Saskatchewan in an attempt to reduce their pollution?
That's certainly what's currently be done with our excess. So all the energy that we export from Manitoba, it goes to, well, we I think pretty much have the cleanest grid around. So it definitely goes to farther, more emitting jurisdictions. And so, yes, we do have a positive impact. Now, getting into this example, it's looking at decarbonizing completely. That was the kind of the exercise that we went through. So yes, I guess if we're using it here, then that's less we can certainly export. Yeah.
Okay, Mike, did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up?
Mostly answered my question. I didn't know that we already did that. I was wondering if it might be amped up more with more savings, and if that might be, I don't know, something like the building block of a nationwide clean grid.
Yeah, we certainly have. We have interconnections to other provinces. Saskatchewan, we're increasing our capacity to Saskatchewan, which they certainly don't have as clean of a grid as Manitoba does. And we have connections into the States as well, and into Ontario. And so essentially whatever we don't need here, we export either through firm contracts or spot market. So when we're building our system, we're building it to meet Manitoba's needs in the peak winter, right? So and then anything excess of that, we market. Manitoba does, or Manitoba Hydro markets it.
All right, so question is next from James. Is there any difference between ground source heat pump and geothermal heating?
So that's the exact same thing. There's been a shift in how we call ground. So geothermal can come to mean, you know, like think of Old Faithful, where people are tapping into that extreme type of geothermal heat to actually create electricity. Whereas what I'm talking about, it's formerly called geothermal, but what we're talking about ground source heat pump is just low grade heat that you're getting from, it could just be as low as in a horizontal loop. It could be as low as 2 meters below the soil, or, you know, you could be digging several hundred feet into the ground. So a lot of people referred to that previously as geothermal, and now we refer to as ground source heat pump, to not confuse the difference between essentially ultra deep wells that have significantly higher temperatures.
All right. James, you feel satisfied by that answer? Do you have any follow-up?
It's just a change in nomenclature is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Peter, that's a nice comment. But so James, in Minnedosa, how was the new siding attached without thermal bridging?
Oh, geez, I'd have to, I might have to get Peter to jump in on that one, Peter Kidd. So I'm trying to do this off memory. I can't remember. There was, what's it called? A Z. It's a type of system that allows you to develop a space between the existing was essentially cinder block structure and put a gap there. And then there's the spray foam insulation that was put in there to develop that solid thermal break and essentially a vapor barrier as well. And then they put the metal cladding outside of that. So that's the part that you see. So underneath that was insulation that didn't exist at all before there. Before it was just right onto the surface of the building. So you certainly feel that cold air on the interior. And they also had metal studs on the interior, which has even greater thermal bridging than wood studs. Z-grits, yeah, Z-grits, yeah, that's it.
I love it when people jump in and also have information. So the next one is coming from Kurt, who's curious to hear your thoughts, Éric, on solar walls for preheating ventilation air.
So we've seen that through our custom energy solutions. We don't have a prescriptive program in that, but we've certainly looked at those, and the economics can be good in the right application. And so I want to make this clear. Efficiency Manitoba, we don't have a bias towards any technology. It's just what saves energy and what is cost effective for the customers, right? So we've seen that application in buildings that need a lot of fresh air ventilation. So that would be an apartment building would be a perfect example. They constantly have to ventilate because they have to presume that they're always occupied. Now you would need to install that solar wall on a southern facing part of the building, which didn't have windows, presumably. That way you could maximize it. So there is one right in downtown Winnipeg. I can't remember which the building is, but you can see it. And the cost effectiveness of that was decent. But again, I would first improve the building envelope and the lighting and all those things. You should almost start off, you should start off with the cheapest first and then go from there, certainly. So, that certainly has been done, and it's been done cost effectively, but it has to be the right application. Southern facing wall, it doesn't have windows, that is a building that needs lots of ventilation air. And it would be eligible through our custom energy solutions rebate.
Okay, Kurt, do you feel satisfied about that answer or anything to follow up with?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure if people know what a solar wall is, Éric.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So a solar wall is essentially, it's not that complex. A system is essentially metal. It's attached to the exterior of the building, black essentially to preheat. It essentially develops a thermal mass on the exterior of your building, and then the fresh air passes through that and gets preheated before it enters the space. Now, is an HRV more cost effective than a solar wall? I don't know. Actually, I would presume it is, but I don't know the payback on a solar wall compared to an HRV.
And then that air goes into the heating system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's presumed it's minus 35 out, and the fresh air is coming in. Now, if it goes through the solar wall, it gets preheated. It gets heated by the solar wall before it enters the ventilation system. And then even after the solar wall, it'll have to get heated. Maybe it went from minus 35 to minus 10, right? So it did a good job, but you still need to heat it some more after that. And that's essentially what an HRV does, is you're getting rid of your stale air that's probably 22 degrees, and you're preheating that minus 35 air as it comes in. So I wouldn't use both systems because they would steal from each other.
Would they? Or wouldn't you? Why not just have the air coming into your HRV be at minus 10 instead of minus 30, and then recover that heat at that point?
Well, you could, but you're cannibalizing the savings from each other, essentially, because it's like two systems that are both heat recovery. It reduces the economics of it, certainly, of both of them, right? Because you're cannibalizing from each other. Not to say it's not doable, obviously.
Okay,
So St. Vital.
We have a question.
Yes, and so when St. Vital closed, and so it had an older demographic, probably. Yes, people who came directly when that closed, and then another wave of people.
Somebody need to mute their mic.
There was a couple of really bad things going on at St. Mary's Road.
Sorry, is that a question?
Sorry?
Did you just want to reframe your question? Sorry.
Oh yeah, there was, it's like the two ministers, I think they actually had 3 ministers at the time, but 2 of the ministers started a relationship. One of them left his wife and the other one left her lesbian partner.
Not sure if that's related to what we were talking about here. Apologies. So I think we've got it handled now. So moving on to Chris's question. That was an entertaining little moment. As I was like, is there a question here? Anyhow, sorry. You mentioned the basic hydro capacity in Manitoba. What are the solar and wind potential capacities? Are there other sources like biomass studied too?
I haven't done a deep dive into, again, I don't work for Manitoba Hydro and haven't done a deep dive into the potential of those. Now, any transition is going to require multiple forms of energy conservation and new types of energy generation as well. And it's going to be a mix if we're going to do that journey to decarbonization. And it's a matter of having energy that you can rely on that's going to meet our energy needs at the times that we need it, and particularly in the depths of winter is when we need it most in Manitoba. Our energy requirements in Manitoba are very different from energy requirements in Arizona and when they occur and so forth. So we got to keep that in mind. This is like a Manitoba perspective, and certainly there's a lot of capacity we have strong winds here, and we do have good sun, but I don't know what the capacity or the ability capacity to meet those. Now, if you have an intermittent type of energy, then you're going to have storage as well, or some form of storing that energy as well. But I couldn't speak to the question.
So if Helga's doing a newsletter,
maybe I could add, when Efficiency Manitoba was Power
that,
Smart, we had
newsletter
programs in all these areas, solar, well, not so much wind, unfortunately, but we did do biomass work. And we're just a startup at this point, and so we lack staff at the moment in the area of biomass, but that will be coming. And I think someone asked a question about solar residential, and so far as I know, that will be coming. And over the next several years, as we develop, I think you will find more and more activities in these areas. We're actually legally constituted to reduce the energy measured at hydro's meters, but that can be done any number of ways. And so I look forward to what we will be doing.
Yeah, no, it's true. This is, I don't know if everybody knows who Peter is. Maybe everybody knows who Peter is. Peter is certainly one of our gurus here in energy efficiency at Efficiency Manitoba. And yes, you're right. We will have a solar PV program. It's in Efficiency Manitoba's energy efficiency plan, and that is coming within our first 3-year window of our efficiency plan.
Oh, I muted myself and almost forgot to unmute. Classic. All right. So we do have a question about what is the Manitoba natural gas production versus imported?
Yeah, you know, what's produced here, yeah, we import significant amounts. There's just the Southwest region where we regenerate that, but again, I can't speak to that. It's not an area of my my expertise, and I should just, you know, stick to my lane.
Is there somebody else in the call who might know a little bit about that? There's a whole bunch of smart people here if anybody wants to jump on with that, if they know. It's cool if you don't too.
Can you repeat the question, please, Laura?
Oh, it's the natural gas production. How much of it is done here in Manitoba versus what's imported? Okay, looks like somebody's got a fun little research project to try and sort that out. So right now I've run out of questions in the chat. Is there anybody who's been a bit nervous and just been like, oh, I don't know if there's going to be time? There is time for your question. Let's hear from you.
Okay, I'll ask one. Éric, are there any plans on introducing rebates based on carbon emission potentials?
Well, if that's not in Efficiency Manitoba's mandate. So Efficiency Manitoba was created by an act of legislature, and our mandate is for, as I said off the top, electric energy reductions and natural gas reductions. We certainly achieve GHG reductions, but we don't have a mandate for it. So that would require a change in regulations in order for us to specifically target that.